let's start with Thomas, pronouns he, him, calling in from Tenacious Xenon. Noble gas with a lot of sass. Thomas is calling in saying that God exists. Let's talk about it. Thomas, you're on the line with Forrest and Paul. How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are y'all doing today?
Never had a bad
So
day.
far, so good.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Um, so I'm a little unfamiliar somewhat with the format still. Do I just begin to speak, or do you guys have a starting place to go
What do
off of?
you what do you believe, and why should we believe it?
Okay. Yeah. So to sort of preface my beliefs, I would not consider myself a science denier, as some of the people that you spoke about beforehand. I do believe in evolution
Hell
and
yeah.
Big Bang in all of those different scientific ideas, because I am more of a classical theist when it comes to my understanding of the idea of God. I am a Christian, but primarily I believe in God due to metaphysical concerns and philosophical ideas rather than sort of fallacious creationist arguments that I've encountered, because I used to be an atheist at one point, and looking more into specifically more scholastic and metaphysical ideas of God seemed to give me a lot more of an idea of something that was more reasonable to believe in, if that makes sense.
So why should we join you on this trip from atheism to theism?
So the biggest thing that sort of convinced me about God's existence was, first off, redefining the idea of God. Not redefining, not in in the idea of creating a completely new idea of God, but rather conceptualizing him as more classical philosophers would have, such as Aristotle, certain Platonic worldviews, as a classically theistic God who is without parts and who is uncontingent. Something which is the absolute reality, divine simplicity. A lot of those ideas would carry out. The biggest thing that I personally would say for a belief in God in general, there's more specific ideas of a Christian God, which I won't get into at first. But the biggest idea for me is the idea of what grounds mathematical and scientific explanations, because I'm not convinced in a materialistic idea of metaphysical values, or not values of systems. Really, because I see Aristotelian metaphysical categories as making a lot more sense intuitively, but also just making a lot more sense when we see the grounding of different scientific laws. For instance, I believe that a lot of science and a lot of materialistic metaphysical presuppositions are built on very axiomatic understandings of trusting one's senses and observances. But I don't think we can truly have that grounding unless we have something that would be outside of those laws, and that would be what I would call God. So I'm arguing more for a Thomistic, or like Aquinas's God, than I am necessarily
So
arguing for creationist Dave's God, if that makes sense.
yeah, so Thomas, help me out here. So you listed math and science. Now, as far as
Yeah,
I
yeah,
understand both of those disciplines, both of those things are descriptive disciplines, right? They describe observations, they describe what we see, and they attempt to make future predictions, and we test them against, we test these predictions against new observations.
yeah.
So to me, they're both descriptive in the same way, a language is descriptive and all this. So I'm confused as to what my understanding needs grounding in beyond mere reality that it's
Okay.
describing.
Sorry, I didn't mean to try to interrupt you there.
No, I was done.
But
No,
You're
you're fine.
you're
You're
good.
fine.
okay, yeah. Sorry. I think to me it's the idea of observances and how can we trust that our observances are based in reality.
Okay,
Um,
but
for instance, I'm sorry.
but does that how why does that matter if our observances are reliable or not in terms of grounding? Like,
Well, because fundamentally we ground science in a way to where, like, I mean, you're both familiar with the scientific method. The the entire point is that we are observing things and that we are taking our observations to be accurate, or at least
no,
trustable in
I
a
I
way.
I I think I just told you what it is. It's the point of science is to make predictions and to see if those predictions come true.
So how
I
are
mean,
we
I
observing if sorry.
I'm
Go ahead,
sorry.
Forrest.
I want to
Forrest
no.
is the
I wanted
scientist
a
here,
couple of.
so
Well, no, it's fine. I don't even want to get into science too much. I just want to get into like I think I'm misunderstanding something, and I want to just clarify. You said that you believe in a God because you need something that, and I'm summarizing what you're saying here. So tell me if I'm mischaracterizing it. You
All right.
said you
Yeah.
need there must be something that is uncontingent and without parts when you're talking about like the universe and everything. It sounds an awful lot like this is just a very circuitous roundabout way to get back to the Kalam cosmological argument of every effect must have a cause, therefore there must be some cause without a cause, and that's God. Or everything in the universe obeys the laws of physics, therefore there must be something outside of the universe, outside of physics, space, time, whatever, to create it, to cause, and that's God. Or any of the other variations of this. It sounds when you talk about something that's unchanged and uncontingent and without parts and all these things that you're throwing in here, that's where it sounds like this is going. And I want to make sure is that the main point of it? Is that where you're trying to get to?
It could be. I don't think I would necessarily articulate it in the same way as the Kalam argument. I think I would probably articulate it more through the Thomistic, the lens of contingencies and hierarchical causes. Um, but
Okay.
I think it makes a lot. Here, sorry. Can I clarify one thing? What I mean by
Please.
our observations must being sorry, our observations being required to be grounded.
Please do.
Okay, yeah. So I think whenever you guys were speaking about the idea of science just being a way that we predict and that we observe if these things came true, how do we know that what we are observing is actually the case? And how do we trust our senses in the way to where we actually know what we are observing is the matter of fact? And that's really what I'm
So
getting at with that statement.
two things here. Number one,
Okay.
I am going to answer that question, but I need to ask one more clarifying question. Did you say that you
All
believe
right.
in the
Yeah.
Christian gods? I'm not sure if I heard you say that or not.
I do believe in the Christian God, but
Okay,
fundamentally, whenever I argue for God as an existent being, I would start with the argumentation of that and then go on to specifically Christian God at another point, if that makes sense. I think they're separate
that's fine.
questions. If is there a God?
That's fine.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that I didn't mishear you and I wasn't going to go down some trail about Christianity and you'd be like, why do you care about Christianity? I mean, okay, so
Yeah, you know, I
what I'm
understand.
hearing here, so the first thing that you learn when you start picking up science, or at least for me, in my very early undergrad, we covered this concept called naive realism. And naive realism is the fallacious belief that your senses are enough to tell you about the reality that you live in. And that is the whole project of science is taking things, we could look around and just gather just basic sensory data and get a lot of wrong conclusions about reality. And so when we look out, say for example, doing spectroscopy, looking out in the universe and figuring out what galaxies are made of and what stars are made of and what different nebulae are made of and like what's going on out in the universe, that is taking data that we don't fundamentally have access to and translating it into something that we do have access to, right? And when we look at even something simpler, if we look at like an infrared camera, you cannot see in infrared, but you can use a camera, a special camera, to translate those wavelengths into the visible spectrum so you can see them. And so you talk about this as if you're saying like how do we know the basis of the blah, blah, blah. That's a lot of the point of science is getting out of your own way and finding what you didn't even know and building knowledge that isn't there because you're able to assemble the data that you have and build up into a new idea. That's the whole point of inductive reasoning is that you're not just saying, well, here's the five options that I've decided on. We'll see which one works. You're inducing something. You're saying, here's what I've got. What does this point to? Even if it's something I've never heard of or thought of before. And
Yeah.
so,
Oops, sorry.
like, I was just going to finish by saying, like, so when you talk about this stuff, like, the biggest thing that I think what it sounds like you're missing, correct me if I'm wrong, what it sounds like you're missing is that we don't know for sure if what we're looking at is the fundamental truth of reality or whatever, but it's the closest damn thing that we have, backed by the best evidence that we have. And when we find better evidence, we change our minds. And it's a hell of a lot better to do that than to assume that there's some sort of supernatural thing that we don't have any real evidence for, just out of some necessity to make it easier for your brain, you know?
Okay, yeah. So I understand where you're going with that. I would also like to clarify. I do. I would apply distrust of one's senses also to observing data collected by these different ways that we collect inaccessible data to our naked eyes. But I would also say that I think that just here, I'm sorry. Let me phrase take my time to phrase this. Um,
Sure.
I really do believe that in order to trust our senses at all, even in observing those things which are becoming more accessible to us, it is necessary to ground the idea that our senses are reliable in some way. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, but that's kind of the thing, is that our senses are at the end of the day all we have. And so, to Paul's point, what Paul was saying is that a major function of science is to make testable predictions. And so, if I were to turn this around and say, okay, now this is something that makes sense to my eyes, my ears, my whatever, that's not good enough. I now need to say, okay, this is the model that I have, and I'm going to apply that to the world. And if this model is accurate, then I should see these things. And that's, the whole point of falsifiability, right? So, like, say, for example, the Big Bang. Like, if the Big Bang happened, then we should see some sort of low level, like low wavelength radiation that's pretty ubiquitously smeared across the entire universe. And indeed, when we look for that, we find the cosmic microwave background radiation. So we don't just say, if I look at the data on the regression of galaxies in a way that makes sense to me, it kind of sounds like this, and there I'm going to roll with it. It's all right. So this is something that makes sense. Now what? What does that mean? And can I double check that? Can I make testable predictions and have those stand up? And that's like the fact checking phase of science. You know what I mean?
Right.
Paul, you look like you had
And
something to add.
at a much more simple method, like if I continually see, if I'm in a room and I continually see doors, but if I attempt to walk through the door, I can't leave the room, then at some point I'm going to start doubting my eyes, right? Or if my eyes are good enough to identify the hole in the room so that I can leave the room, then I can trust my eyes to that extent, right? Just to the extent that, oh, I can identify a hole in the wall versus not a hole in the wall. So as Forrest was saying before, most of science is compensating for the fact that we can't reliably rely on our senses, that we are not great at that, but they're just kind of good enough, and we don't have any other way. So,
Okay.
What is insufficient about what Forrest and I described for grounding?
Before I speak to that, can I ask one clarifying question real quick?
Sure.
Okay. So would you guys take it just for like? Let me make sure I'm getting it right. You guys would just take it for granted then that we should just use our senses as they are and try to compensate for their inaccuracy.
They, so yeah, but also, like, what's the alternative? What are you using if not your senses to make determinations about the what is real and what is not? That's kind of
Yeah.
all
So
you've got.
I would still say that we use our senses insofar as obviously we're using our senses right now to communicate with each other. But I'd also say that we would ground the idea that our senses can be somewhat reliable in this something that would be outside of testability and outside of change. And I would say that I need to ground that because I don't know if I can. I don't think I can bring myself to axiomatically understand my senses as trustable enough to see the world, especially when we are not even able to prove necessarily that everybody sees things in the same way or hears things in the same way. I just think our senses
Right,
are so unreliable that we
but
must.
we can standardize those things in a way that seems to elicit the exact same results from everybody. And so, like, whether or not my red is exactly the same as your red. We're using the same kind of cone cells to go to the same kind of brain, and we both agree on what red is and means, and we have the same psychological effects elicited by the color red and all. So whether or not our perception is actually identical doesn't really matter in terms of like what the effects are. And again, that doesn't answer my question, which is your senses are, as far as I can tell, the only thing you have to make determinations, to understand anything about the universe that you live in. And yeah, you're going to have to account for where they are inaccurate as long as you know they are and try to make those corrections. That's what any reasonable person would be doing. So if you're not doing that, if you have some other modality to understand what the ultimate truth of the universe is beyond your senses, I would like to hear it.
Okay, I sort of understand what you're getting at now. Um, I would say that the existence of a God that grounds these ideas of senses and grounds the idea that I can observe things would make it much easier for me. I'm not here. Let me rephrase that because that's going to sound like it's out of just simple convenience. But I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this. I'm sorry.
Hmm?
Um,
Maybe you can just give me an example.
yeah.
Maybe that would be easier.
Okay.
Just what's an example of a way that you know that you can test and know things about God that don't involve sight, sound, touch, smell, taste, proprioception, whatever else.
Well, I don't necessarily know that we can use material tests on a lot of philosophical ideas. So, I mean, one question to clarify: would you guys both consider yourselves relatively materialistic, as far as
Yeah.
like metaphysical claims
Yep.
would go, like naturalists?
As far as I understand the concept of like metaphysics, because I'm not a philosopher, so I guess, but as far as I understand what you're saying, I'm pretty sure yes, I would agree with that.
Okay,
I'm,
yeah.
I'm a
No, I'm not
methodological
trying to.
naturalist, so
There you go.
Okay, yeah, I'm not
Those
trying to use
words.
any terms like you know, corner you into something that you're not. But so I think that of outside, so it's going to be hard, obviously, to try to give you an example. Then, if you would not want to recognize, if you wouldn't recognize the idea of things outside of the naturalistic world, but I think just the very idea that we have any metaphysics whatsoever, and the idea of looking at if we can trust one's senses and trying to find whether or not we can. And I think that's just a relatively immaterial idea to look at in the first place. I'm really phrasing this very badly, so
Well,
don't.
I said
so
no, it's fine.
Yeah.
would you
It's what it sounds like you're saying. I'm sorry. I want to hear what Paul said, but like
go for it?
what it what that sounds like, and I don't think this is what you're trying to say. So you know,
Okay.
shore up my understanding. What it sounds like you're saying is the very fact that we can question our understanding of reality necessitates a supernatural explanation.
I don't know. That's not exactly what I'm getting at. I don't necessarily reject that in full. I don't know if I would articulate it that in that manner. Um, but that's not exactly what I'm getting at. If that makes sense.
So start with that then. Where build off of that. What does that get wrong, and how should that be rephrased to more closely align with what you're actually driving towards?
Okay. Yeah.
Unless you have a completely better way to start. I'm not trying to put you in a box. I just think that's a good place to start based on what I've heard from you so far.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So keep in mind, I'm still really researching into more philosophical ideas too. So sometimes my phrasing isn't the best off the top of my head.
It's all good. It's
But
also a genuinely weird situation to call in and talk to two strangers on the internet. So like, take your time. We're gonna get there.
yeah, yeah. So I would point to materialism and its relationship with the senses as almost being to the point where if we do not have a supernatural force or a yeah, I guess supernatural force is the best way to put it. We must be cornered into such an extreme skepticism that no truth would exist at all because
Is
our
that such a
senses would
bad
be
thing?
so unreliable. Is that a bad thing?
To,
I'd say that is
yeah.
I'd say that is a bad thing because we certainly act as if there's truth.
Right. But like that's just like when I go around in my day to day, it's entirely possible that I'm a brain in a vat being fed chemicals. It's very possible that I'm in an alien simulation. It's very possible that I'm in an insane asylum right now thinking that this is my life when it isn't. It's possible that I actually just woke up 5 minutes ago and came into existence and that all of my memories were pre programmed into me. All of these things are possibilities, but I interact with reality around me as best as I can understand that it's reality. And when I say that I know things, I really am kind of just saying I believe it so hard that if I didn't believe it, it would be absurd. It would be ridiculous in my understanding of the universe for this thing to not to be true. And so, like, we go back to the point of science, like, we don't know anything in science. There's not a single thing that I would ever say definitively 110% this is for sure. That's the whole point of theories, is that it's the best understanding that we have, a functional explanation of observed natural phenomena backed by the best evidence that we've got, but that is subject to change when new evidence comes around. So, like, not knowing something for sure is just being honest enough to say, I don't have access to literally every single bit of knowledge in the entire universe. I don't know everything about everything about everything. So, as best as I can tell, this is a lime slushy and it tastes delicious. It could be boiled horse urine in a Viking flask that tastes horrible, and I'm actually just been kicked in the horse enough times that I think it's tight. Like, it could be, but I don't think that's the case. And I'm not claiming to be absolutely certain. It's just, it would be ridiculous for me to assume that I was wrong about that because of the evidence that I have. So being intellectually honest and saying, I could never possibly really fundamentally know stuff isn't the same as walking through life saying, I don't know anything, nothing's real, I have no idea where I am or what I'm doing or what anything like, and being completely confused all the time. It's not that doesn't it's not necessary. It's just being honest and saying, I'm working with the best evidence I've got and I'm going to do the best I can. What's so bad about that?
I think that the thing that is so intuitively bad about that is the idea that you're living within a truth that you know is not true. I think that genuine truth
Thomas,
matters a lot to me.
Thomas, I need you to
That's not what I
define.
said.
I need you. Yeah, I
Okay,
need you to
here
define
I'm
truth for
sorry if
me.
I mischaracterized.
No, just the clear
What?
thing is, I didn't say I know it's not true. I said I will never be certain. And Paul, I think, is about to
Okay,
say something really important as well.
yeah,
Well,
okay.
no, I
Just
just
before
need
he does, I wanted to apologize
in order
for.
to proceed with this. I need to know what you think truth is in order to even proceed.
Um, truth. I mean, I'll just give the definition off the top of my head. Um, the 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 world as is. Let me think of a good way to phrase it.
Let me
The
give you
way
my
things are,
definition of truth. And okay, sorry, I just didn't mean to
the
cut
way
you off.
things are in actuality.
Okay, so I define truth as the extent to which a proposition conforms to reality. Would you agree with that
Okay,
definition?
yeah, I'm fine with that definition.
Okay, so the extent to which it conforms to reality tells us that truth is grounded sufficiently by reality.
Okay.
If God happens to be part of reality, cool, awesome. If God's part of reality, neat, then he's part of it. But we don't need God to define truth because truth is that which conforms to reality.
Well, I think my definition of God would also perceive him as the ultimate reality and the source of all reality as well. So I think that it would be
But
necessary under my definition as well.
okay, but that's why I asked you for a definition of reality, right?
It's
Because I'm
kicking the
not
can
going to
down the
accept
road.
that
Yeah, I think. Well,
for
you
a
asked me a
definition of
definition.
truth. Definition of
Yeah,
truth, and that's so.
yeah.
And if God is true, cool, then he's part of reality, and therefore he's part of truth. But he gets to supersede reality in terms of truth.
I would say that fundamentally, like any definitional, or at least the definitional framework of God that I would be discussing, would would define him fundamentally as that which defines reality. So truth would
Okay,
be
so you're
contingent on
defining
him.
a god that. So you're just defining a god into existence here.
No, not necessarily. I would say that this would be part of God's definition, and I would say that it explained that this God would be revealed to us via reason through other methods, such as the idea of metaphysical, necessity, the contingency, like we've already discussed, and the idea of
Yeah, so we asked you long ago what was insufficient about our view that requires a god, and we've been going round and round. And it seems like I still have yet to hear, and maybe Forrest has, I've yet to hear any insufficient thing other than that you don't like how non-confident we can be in our senses, and Forrest and I are just kind of like, what other choice do we have? We can't be fully confident in our senses, so we just kind of shrug our shoulders and say meh. And if you want to back up and say, well, God's telling me my senses are reliable, I'm also think that's skeptical, because I wear glasses, and I wore glasses when I believed in God. And when I believed in God, I didn't just go around driving without my glasses saying, well, you know what, God's going to tell me that my senses are good enough. God was telling me my senses weren't good enough. So I'm confused about your whole enterprise here.
Okay, I think I sort of understand what you're getting at there. I'd say that maybe more so than senses being reliable is the idea that I believe that there is an objective truth, right? That we are observing, and without a higher metaphysical um, category or necessity of being, we don't we don't have any grounding for this truth existing. Because, like you guys would say, that you can't call anything absolutely true. I would
Right.
just
But
call
I
that
gave you a
so
definition of
fundamentally.
truth, right? I gave you a definition of truth that you said was generally fine, that the
Okay,
extent to
yeah,
which a
okay.
proposition conforms to reality. So how is ultimate truth better than that definition that I gave you? There must be some gap between the definition of truth I gave you and ultimate truth.
Well, I think the difference, right, again, between ultimate truth and the definition of truth that we're working with is the idea that we define reality probably somewhat differently, like we've already somewhat discussed.
Reality is everything that exists, which includes a God if he exists.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, once again, I'm sorry if I'm
No,
pausing.
It's
we've
fine.
all I'm using a different vocabulary. Forrest is using a different vocabulary. You are. I think we're all trying to translate our terms so that each other can understand. And I get that takes time.
Yeah. Would you mind repeating your latest question? That
Sure.
I'm starting to
So
find a grading.
my latest question was that we were using a working definition of truth that meant the extent to which a proposition conforms to reality. And I think we tentatively agreed that reality is everything that exists, including God if he exists. And then you brought in some idea of an ultimate truth that was better than my truth, that was better somehow. And I'm looking for
Oh,
the gap between what I gave and what you're calling ultimate.
okay. So I do think I sort of understand where we're sort of diverging a little bit here. And I think I'm saying that the idea of ultimate truth is not necessarily different than that of the working definition of truth that we've already agreed upon, but more so that I would believe that truth and reality fundamentally are outflowings of this metaphysically necessary being called God, if that makes
And
a little bit more sense than what I'm saying.
what makes him necessary other than just reality? So I at the start you talked about axioms. I think Forrest and I both hold that as an axiom that reality exists. We just I think we would have to agree that that's axiomatic. What
Okay.
is a problem with holding that axiomatically, and how does adding God to that make it non-axiomatic?
Here. Okay. I think we'd have to start going back to the idea of maybe a separate argument or a separate discussion about whether or not of why God would be necessary. Is that what you're asking?
What is insufficient about grounding truth in reality?
Right. Okay. I mean, because I'd say fundamentally, grounding truth in reality is grounding truth in God. So I'd have to then prove God in a different way than we're speaking of. So I think we'd have to touch on a
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
I guess the biggest thing is, like I think that's a good place to end it. Is I hope you call back and try that next, because so far all we've agreed on is that reality probably exists, and we think that it just does, and you think that there must be a supernatural explanation for that. And what it sounds like I'm hearing is like if we don't understand, like if I were to take Paul and my's position and straw man it into oblivion and just say that we don't know anything about anything, like we have no idea what anything is, we have no concept of reality. All we know is we're alive. Cognito ergo sum. I know I'm alive. I know I'm thinking. That's it. That's all I've
Yeah.
got. That even if I were to go that far with it, that still would not justify saying, so then there's magic. And there's this guy that lives outside of space and time or whatever, and he can like make planets and people and stuff and doesn't want us eating shellfish or fucking each other in the butt. And like that's just a lot to add there. You know what I mean? And so like even just the guy, I don't know what reality is, so there must be some being that is also incomprehensible and so big and beyond anybody's explanation and like understanding. Like nobody can truly know God. God is so massive and mysterious and incredible. You said you're a Christian. The Bible says that he's beyond comprehension and everything. And so there's this thing that we don't understand called reality, and therefore there's an even bigger thing that we don't understand called God. And I don't understand why that's the leap you're willing to make. So I hope we've been on the call for about 30 minutes. We got 5 other people waiting, and we got like maybe a 3-ish hour show. So, Thomas, I'm going to move on to the next call, but I really sincerely do appreciate you calling in and talking to us. You were great. I hope you call back and talk to us again.
Yeah.
I'm hosting again tomorrow. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
fun. I'm hosting again tomorrow. I don't know when Paul's next show is, but call and talk to us some more. And I hope we get a little bit further next time.
Yeah, I just wanted to say it was a good conversation. Good to talk to y'all. Sorry if I accidentally misrepresented anyone's views.
I don't think you did.
All
I
good.
think it was a very productive conversation. We got through one part of it. We got to agreeing on what
Mhm.
reality is, kind of, and that's a big step in the right direction.
Thanks,
Take care,
Thomas.
Y'all have a
Thomas.
great night.
Night.
Bye-bye. You too.
And like a subscriber, Jimmy will have to go on a polyamorous dating show to win some prize money.
Wait, I want to do that. So also hit like and subscribe, and then go to patreon.com/calltheline. I was trying to make you laugh and ruin the take. That's why that silly face earlier. If I was on a polyamorous dating show, I would just choose everybody. Except Frederick. Leave a comment.